Well, my name is Pastor Dennis Otto. Now, I'm probably a lot different than most pastors you've ever met or that you know. For one, I don't preach to people. I like to tell people what God has done in my life, and then you choose. It's always your choice. And that's what I like to do. I was also a drug addict for 30 years. I was a methamphetamine cook, distributor. I rode with a 1% motorcycle club. I don't know if you know what that is, but these guys are the worst of the worst, like the Hells Angels, Sons of Silence. That's who I used to run with. So I was a drug addict for 30 years, and I'm not going to talk about the pain, the misery, the failed marriages, and all that stuff, because there's no glory in that. I want to talk to you about what God has done in my life. So my drug addiction ended when I was sentenced to 110 months in prison. My charges were first-degree manufacturing, first-degree distribution, a felon in possession of firearms. I was classified as a violent criminal. Truth be told, that's what I was. You would think when you get sentenced to 110 months in prison, that'd be kind of devastating, if not even traumatic. For me, I had a sigh of relief. Because one night, I was about 6 months before the judge sentenced me to prison. I was in my backyard one night burning stuff that I don't want to put in my garbage. And I was out there with my buddy Opie, who was a patch holder with the 1% club. I won't mention which club I ran with, but he was a patch holder with them. And I remember this so well. I looked at Opie and I said, Opie, man, I said, I'm tired. I want out. I want something different. I want something different. And I'll never forget his laugh. He laughed at me and he said, Dennis, men like you and me, we don't get out. We die. And I tell you, that's actually what I thought my lot in life was. I was just going to die in that addiction, in that lifestyle. So when the judge said 110 months, I had a sigh of relief. I survived. I survived. I wasn't worried about doing the time. I knew I could do the time. I wasn't somebody that was scared to go to prison. When I was in prison, I wasn't a model inmate. I did a lot of time in segregation, the whole. I had control issues, anger issues, everything else. I walked out of prison 2 weeks before my 48th birthday. I'm 65 now, so 17 years ago, I walked out of prison. And when I walked out of prison, I was scared. I got to tell you, I was scared. I didn't know who I was. I started doing drugs at 13. I never quit until I walked into prison. I think it was 43 when I walked into prison. I never quit. Never. Not once. So I didn't know who I was. My whole life was revolved around that lifestyle. I knew I didn't want to be the guy I was before I went to prison. I didn't want to be the guy that I was when I was in prison. But I didn't know who I was. But I knew I wanted something different. Well, part of getting out of prison, I was on ISR, intense supervised release. That means that I'm really held accountable. They UA'd me 3 or 4 times, a week and all that stuff. And one of the stipulations was that I had to go to NA or AA, Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous. Drug addict, so I went to NA. I was there probably a month, maybe 2 months, and I meet this gal, Patty, there. And that night we went out the group went to Perkins afterwards for fellowship and stuff like that. And I'm sitting there talking to Patty. Patty's raised in an all-Christian home. I mean, her whole family is Christian. Uncles, aunts, nieces, nephews. The whole family is a very strong Christian family. She's 19 years younger than I am. But we're talking that night, and I looked at Patty and I said, you're going to end up dating me. And I remember she went, no, I'm not. She was engaged to be married. I said, yeah, that's not going to stop me. I was a little bit full of myself in those days. And lo and behold, a couple months later, maybe a month later, she started dating me. I'm pretty charming, ain't I? This is Patty. She started dating me. And I don't know, what was it, 3 months later, 4 months later, she's pregnant. And she's pregnant with my kid. And that's when her all-Christian family found out about me. I don't think I got any Christmas cards that year or the year after. I was not their first choice. I mean, what wasn't there to love? I was an ex-con, 19 years older than her, had a lot of issues yet. I mean, wouldn't you want me dating your daughter? So I don't want to say they didn't like me, but they didn't like me. I know they were praying with different groups and stuff, and I always tell their family, I say, yeah, I know you were praying I would just disappear, you know, but here I am. So we ended up moving in together after Caden was born, our son. We move in together, and right after that, Patty starts attending church again. Something about living with me, you realize you need Jesus in your life, you know. But she started attending church, and she didn't say nothing to me. I think she was scared on how I would react. You know, I was still pretty rough around the edges and stuff like that. And I think she was scared what I would do or react. Well, one night we went out to eat with her family, and her brother-in-law, Matt, sitting across the table from me. And I could tell he was looking at me, you know. You know how you can tell when somebody's kind of checking you out, and I'm thinking, dude, what are you looking at me for, you know? That's what I'm thinking in my head. And all of a sudden he goes, Dennis, where are you at spiritually? And I must have looked at him like he had 3 heads, because who talks like that? You know, nobody I know talks like that. And so I'm looking, I'm going to give him some smart aleck comment, you know, like, don't you know who I am, like I was somebody, you know, but something like that. And I heard a voice. And it was a voice like a person was sitting right next to me. Now, I've done a lot of drugs, and I've probably seen 1 or 2 things that weren't really there, but I've never heard voices. And so I paused, and the voice said, Dennis, for once in your life, be honest. And so I was. I looked at Matt, I said, Matt, I've been living in hell my whole life. I said, I hope when I die it's better than this. And he, you know, and then I sat back, because I know how Christians are, they like to preach, you know, so I'm figuring he's going to start preaching to me, but he didn't. All he did is he started asking me questions. And I could tell by the way he asked the questions that he really cared about my answers. And he asked me once, he goes, Dennis, do you believe in God? Do you believe in Jesus? And I said, Matt, I said, the things I've done, the things I've seen other people to do, the things I've seen in prison, the things I did in prison, I said, it's really hard for me to believe there's a God out there that lets that kind of stuff go on. And I said, if there is a God, I said, I see good people, yet their little boy's dying of cancer, a little girl gets hit by a car and killed. I said, if God's not helping good people like that, I said, why the hell would he do anything for a man like me? Why would God do anything for a man like me? It made no sense to me. Well, we talked the night away, and at the end of the night, he gave me a book called One Heartbeat Away by Mark Cahill. And in the back of the book, I read the book, and in the back, there were 2 prayers, a prayer of condemnation and a prayer of salvation. And he said, if you don't pray the prayer of salvation, by default, you prayed the prayer of condemnation. You guys, I've been living that prayer my whole life. I wanted something different. I got down on my knees and I gave my life to Christ. Now, I've got friends today that were raised Christian, you know, and they tell me, Dennis, I don't even know when I gave my life to Christ, because he's always just been there. You know, he's always just been a part of my life. I know exactly when I gave my life to Christ. It was March 15th, 2010 at about 9:20 at night. Because when I gave my life to Christ, when I got down on my knees, that hole I was trying to fill my whole life with drugs and alcohol, women and violence, that hole was full for the first time. And I felt it. I felt different. I felt the love of God for the first time. The first time I actually felt loved. So the next morning I get up and I call Matt and I said, Matt, I did it. And he right away said, what did you do now? You know, my track record wasn't the best, you know. And I told him I gave my life to Jesus. So he picks me up and he takes me to buy my first Bible. And 4 days later, you guys ever hear of Alpha? Okay, it's a program kind of teach you how to walk as a Christian. 4 days after I give my life to Christ, he's got me at the celebration dinner for Alpha at River Valley Church in Apple Valley, a huge church. And the celebration dinner is kind of the end of the one session and the start of the next. I walk in this room, and there's got to be 150 people in there, and they're all nice. I have never experienced something like that before in my life, you know. They're all nice. I mean, they're talking, laughing. This little lady, she couldn't have been no bigger than this. Gray hair, she come up and gave me a hug. And, you know, when she was hugging me, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if she would be hugging me if she knew who I was. even some of the guys were hugging me. And that made me pretty uncomfortable because in the penitentiary, we did not do a lot of hugging. But when I left there, I felt good. I did, I felt good. I knew this was home. I knew that was home. So I went home and Patty, we talked and we decided to start going to River Valley Church. Shortly after being there, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, they got a call wind of my story. And so they did a video testimony of me. And they played it at all their campuses, and I think there were like 6 or 7 campuses at this time. And so right after they played my video testimony, people were coming up to me. Wives were saying, Dennis, would you talk to my husband? People come, would you talk to my son? Would you talk to my dad? You know, guys that were struggling like I did. And so I started, I don't want to say working with men, but I started walking with them. I was somebody they could talk to, somebody that understands where they come from. I had 30 years of addiction. I understand, I get it. You know, I understand the struggles. So I started walking with these guys. And this went on. My life changed. It started getting good. Patty and I got married. We bought a house in Apple Valley. We had another son, Noah. He was born. I was 53 years old and I got a brand new kid. I should have read a book on that. But no, things are good. I've got a life. I had a life that I never dreamt. When I walked out of prison, there was no, truth be told, when I walked out of prison, I fully expected to go back someday. I fully expected that that's where I was going to go back to. That's what I thought I had to look forward to. So, I mean, I had a life that, God gave me a life again that I never dreamt possible. Well, things are going good. I'm working, I'm a heavy equipment operator by trade. I'm working with these men. Things are really good. We've got a nice house in Apple Valley and all that stuff. Anybody that knows me knows I'm an avid outdoorsman. I love to fish, I love to hunt, I love anything on the outside. And so one day I got home and Patty and Noah were running errands and Caden, he was 6, so what's that, 5th grade or 1st grade? First grade. Caden's is cool, Patty and Noah are running around, I'm in the house, and I decided to go ice fishing. So I sit on the couch and I'm pulling my socks on to go ice fishing and stuff. And all of a sudden I get this pain in my chest. And this pain was serious, something I have never felt before, and it rocked me. And then the pain went up, I'll never forget, it went up into my face, like my whole face hurt. And I said, oh shoot, you know, I probably said something different, but we're going to use shoot today. And I dialed 911. I'm not going to dial 911 unless I know I'm dying, you know. So I'm sitting on the couch, I dial the 911 and I've got my other thumb over the other one just waiting. I'll get that pushed, you know, no matter what happens. And all of a sudden I realized that all the doors to my house are locked. My big garage door is closed, and I thought, if I have to hit the other one, I don't want them to have to break my door down. Excuse me, just so you know, I got over pneumonia a week ago, so I still have a little tickle in my throat. But I realized I don't want them to break my doors down. So I got up to unlock the front door and I made it like 5 feet and my legs gave out. I collapsed to the floor, I couldn't walk. And then I used that word again, oh shoot, you know. I crawled to the front door and I unlocked it. And then I sat back against the wall and I hit the other one and I thought, well, I might die, but my door is gonna live today, you know. And I'll never forget, the EMT comes and she does EKG on me right away, you know. She hooks the wires up, and young gal, and she come with a big smile on her face, and she goes, well, Dennis, good news, you didn't have a heart attack. And by this time, the pain was gone, so I looked at her and said, I'm going fishing. And that's when the argument started. She wants me to go to the hospital, I want to go fishing, you know, and I'm trying to show her pictures of the fish I caught the day before, and she wasn't having it. Finally, she looked at me, she goes, well, Dennis, obviously something happened. And I looked at her, I said, well, maybe it was gas, you know. And she goes, you're sitting on the floor, you know, and she kind of had me there. Well, then Patty came home, and if you're married, I don't have to explain why, but then I decided to go to the hospital. So I'm on my way to the hospital, and the EMT goes, Dennis, it's a good thing you're coming to the hospital. And I said, why is that? And she goes, your blood pressure is dropping steadily. Well, I get to Ridges out in Burnsville, And the doctor right away does an emergency CT scan on me. And he comes up to me, goes, Dennis, you need to get to the University of Minnesota right now. He said, the problem is that the helicopter's out, and he goes, I don't believe we have time to get another one in, so we're gonna try driving you. And I looked, I said, Doc, give it to me straight. I said, what am I looking at? He said, if you make it to the hospital, you've got a fighting chance. That's what his voice told me. His eyes told me I was already dead, and I seen it. I knew it. I knew I was dying. Well, I get in the ambulance. Some dude sitting next to me just watching me like this, you know, for, you know, whatever you do when you die, you probably know what that happens. I don't. But he's sitting there watching me, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to talk to God about this, because I believe I'm not going to live 1 second longer than God says, and I don't believe I'm going to die 1 second sooner than he says. So I talked to God, and I said, God, I said, you know, if you want to take me home, I said, I'm ready. I'm ready. I said, but, if you bring me home, I've read the Bible, and it says you'll take care of the widows and orphans. I've got control issues, you know. So I said, if you take me home, I'm going to have a widow and 2 young orphans. I'm going to hold you to your word. Otherwise, we're going to have a problem. You know, that's how I talk to God anyhow. Good pastor that I am. But we're talking, you know, and I'm talking to him, but I said, God, if you want me to stay, I will stay, and I will do whatever you ask. Well, I get up to the university, and it was complete chaos. They were not expecting a live person to show up. I like to surprise people, you know. The surgeon met me at the door, and we're running to the operating room. And, you know, for a surgeon, I thought he would ask a little smarter questions. He asked me once, he goes, if I have to replace your valve, what kind do you want? And I looked at him and said, one that works? You know? Well, it ended up I had an ascending aortic dissection. They took veins out of my legs, rebuilt artery around my heart and stuff like that. It was a, 14-hour open heart surgery, 5 days in a coma. It was a tough one. That one set me back. That one set me back a bit. I ended up going home after a week or 2. After I came out, they took me out of the coma. It was an induced coma because of the pain. I went home. I think I had 2 more ambulance rides. 2 more ambulance rides after that, you know, complications. My heart rate went up to like 200 and some and stuff like that, you know. But I started to recover. And one night we're at River Valley, went to Saturday night, we went to church. And Pastor Pam, a pastor there, come up to me and goes, Dennis, are you ever going to be able to do construction again? And at this moment, I didn't think there was a chance that I'd ever do construction again. But I said, Pam, I don't know. And she goes to me, she goes, well, you've been working with these men for the last few years. She goes, I always thought you would make a good pastor. Now, those are words that I never dreamt possible that somebody would say to me. I think you'll make a good pastor, you know. But when she said that, it like lit a spark inside of me. So I started talking to other pastors at River Valley, courses they took. Some went to college, some took online courses, and I was looking for online, not in college. So I went home and I started looking at some of these courses that they talked about. The problem is, folks, is that Patty was a stay-at-home mom. I was on temporary disability because of my heart condition, and our temporary disability covered about half of our mortgage. So you don't have to be an accounting major to understand what our finances were doing. Our finances were bad. So I looked in the checkbook. Well, the courses there were 9 of them, and they're like $110 a piece. So I looked in the checkbook, and we had $130 in the checkbook. And that was it until the next disability check came. So I bought the course. And then I told Patty, and I got to tell you, I wish God would talk to both of us at the same time sometimes, because she was not happy with me. But I told her, I said, if this is what God wants, he'll make a way. He'll make a way. Well, the next day, our brother-in-law and sister-in-law come over, and I told them what I purchased the night before, that I was going to go and get my pastor credentials. And the first words, and I didn't say anything about our financial hardship. I just said I wanted to become a pastor. First words out of Tony's mouth was, Dennis, let Sarah and I bless you and pay for all your courses. He paid for them all, even the one I ordered the night before. I started crying. Tom calls me the Iron Marshmallow because I cry at the drop of a hat nowadays. He paid for all the courses. I started crying. I look at Patty. I said, I think God just spoke. So I did heal up. I went back to work and everything. I did get my pastor credentials through the Assemblies of God in 2016, spring of 2016, so 8 years ago. And I always knew that God had more for me than running heavy equipment. That's what I did for a living. I always knew that God had more. The part of the thing that was, a lot that was holding me back was my family. They don't understand even what I do today. In fact, when I told my mom I was getting my pastor credentials, she rolled her eyes at me. Like, oh, what's next? You know, holy cow. At least I'm not telling you I'm going to prison, you know. But anyhow, I thought, how am I going to tell my family, even some of my friends, that I quit a really good paying job to start a ministry that I have no idea how I'm going to get paid, you know. So that was really holding me back. Well, the spring of 2017, I go see my cardiologist for my yearly checkup. And she always did an echo, you know, checking my arteries and stuff and say, oh, see you next year. Well, this year, she said, Dennis, I want you to come in and have a CT scan done. And I looked at her and said, okay. So a few weeks later, I went in and had a CT scan done. She sits me in her office again after that's done, and she goes, Dennis, I want you to go have an angiogram. And I looked at her, I said, Doc, what's going on? You know, all the other years they did an echo and up, see you next year. I said, now you doing these other tests. And she goes, Dennis, where they grafted your veins in, all the grafts are closing. And she goes, we don't know why. And I'm thinking to myself, that means they have to cut me open again. And I just, man, I barely made it the first time. I really didn't want to do it a second time. But I had time to think about it. Because we scheduled, I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks later, the angiogram. Well, one day I'm thinking, and I said, huh, if I have to have a procedure done, that's going to be my excuse to my family and my friends and stuff that I'm going to go into ministry. I can't do construction anymore. Health-wise, I can't do it, and the only thing I'm qualified for is ministry. So that I had an excuse. All right, I go in and have my angiogram. Me and Patty are in the room. The doctor comes in, and she's just all smiles. She come in there, Dennis, your arteries look awesome. She goes, I wish my arteries looked as good as yours. I got mad. I said, why am I doing all these tests and stuff? They're expensive even with you. And she's looking at me like I grew 3 heads, and Patty, she's always looking at me like that. But she took my excuse away. So she leaves, and I'm sitting there and just, now what, you know? And all of a sudden I started laughing. And I told Patty, I said, God just told me that if you want to go into ministry, you're going to go into ministry because I'm calling you to it, not because of some medical thing. Don't you read the Bible? I raise people from the dead. This is easy, you know. So Patty and I talked and stuff, and she knew where my head was at, what I wanted to do. And one day, a couple months after the thing with the angiogram, I'm with a pastor friend of mine, and he's praying over me. And when he was praying over me, that voice came back. And when it came back, all it said was All In Ministries. That was it, nothing else. I knew from that moment on that this was what I was supposed to start, a ministry called All In Ministries. So I go home and I'm talking to Patty, and I said, Patty, I got a couple questions for you. I said, do you believe I'm a man of God doing the best I can? Folks, I am not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. If you don't believe me, ask Tom, he'll tell you. But I said, I'm doing the best I can. And she goes, yes. I said, do you believe men that are struggling with addiction issues, incarceration issues, things that I work through? I said, do you believe that this is where I belong? And she goes, of course. And I said, well, I've got one more question. And she started going, she started talking about, you know, our finances. Folks, we went into serious debt with my heart stuff, and we just at this time started to climb out of the hole. We had like $300 or $400 in the bank. That was it. I mean, I work and making a weekly paycheck, but that was it. So she's bringing up the finances and stuff, and she wasn't exaggerating. Everything she said was legit. But I said, well, Patty, I didn't ask the question yet. So she gets quiet, and I said, do we trust God? Do we trust God? And I could tell she was getting amped up a little bit, and I said, well, this is a yes or no question. If somebody asks you, do you trust God? It's not yes, when, yes, but, yes, if. It's yes or no. That's the only 2 answers acceptable. And she looked at me, she said, yes, I think it was Less than a week later, I called my boss and I quit my job. I didn't give notice. I just quit. I'm done. We had no money, $300 or $400 in the bank, but I've got family of 4, mortgage, everything else. So basically no money. And I started All In Ministries. I knew nothing about running a nonprofit. I knew nothing about the 501c3 or getting a board of directors. I knew none of this. I quit before I did any of this stuff. Since I quit my job and went into ministry full time, we have never been late on a payment. Never, not once, not once. In fact, today, on the first of the month, I write every bill we have and we're done for the month. I started All In Ministries. And when I started, all I was doing was mentoring a half a dozen guys, like Jesse and other guys. That's all I was doing. Today, I'm doing so much more. I'm working in different treatment centers, running groups. I'm working in the jails. We do a program at our church. Just things, I do speaking engagements, which just floors me because I hate speaking. But I do a lot of speaking engagements and stuff. I wrote a book, things that I never dreamt of. The ministry is going so strong. Well, you guys know there's no shortage of people struggling with addiction. I mean, I wish there was 10 of us, and we still would be swamped. But two and a half years ago, we hired Patty. She works with women. I'm not going to work with women. That's a bad mix, guys working with women. So she works with women. Patty's got over 15 years of sobriety. I've got over 20. So we both know a little bit about addiction, a little bit about recovery. And we've been doing it now. Well, the ministry is actually 7 years old this month, 7 years that I've been doing this ministry full time. I love my job. It's not always easy. There's a lot of hard moments, like when you have somebody that you've been working with and they relapse and overdose, and you're talking to the wives or the daughters, and all they're doing is, why, Dennis, why? And there's not a lot of high moments when you're dealing with addiction, but it's one I believe God has called me to do. One day I was down in Faribault prison, and one of my old cellies was there. And he come up to me, goes, Automatic, that was my nickname in prison, Automatic. He goes, Automatic. He goes, why do you come down to the prisons like this, And I looked at Ryan, I said, Ryan, remember when we used to walk the yard? I said, when we were walking the yard, everybody in the yard was a tough guy. Everybody in the yard is a tough guy. I said, but when you're laying in bed at night by yourself and your thoughts are your own, I said, I know what you're thinking about. I know what you're thinking about. And it's not how tough you are. I can guarantee you that. And I said, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. More importantly, it breaks his heart. Remember I told you in the ambulance, I told God that if he had me stay, I would stay and do whatever he asks. I believe right now, this day, this hour, this second, I am doing exactly what God wants me to do.
I'm going to add 2 minutes on yours. I never want to upstage because you can't upstage this, but I'll tell you about second chances and what the guys we work with and stuff, because when it really died down here, I spent 2 years following Dennis and doing certain things, but it's fascinating when puzzle pieces come together. The footprint you created with your meth manufacturing was West St. Paul, across the river, down to
Cannon Falls, Red Wing, Hastings.
That whole footprint. When I started trying to find, I think I told you, when I was talking to certain facets of gangs, and I said, I need to find who's pumping drugs into my community in Red Wing. And that's when I started to explore, and that's when Jesse fell in my lap. You go off the market, so to speak. Jesse picked up part of his footprint. And then there was another one, Ben Schmidt, that I ran into, a kid trying to get out of the same stuff. I met him at the gym, and we wrote Ben's book called 6 Years Lost. And Ben and Jesse were kind of sequela of what Dennis did. It's fascinating to watch the footprint you have now, because you've given the second chance, and he's cleaning this whole up. So your outreach goes all the way not only in St. Paul, Apple Valley and stuff, but it's in Cannon Falls and so on. And so because of Jesse, because of meeting Ben, and Dennis, there was a town hall meeting that was held in Red Wing probably 6 years ago, was it, with the treatment court?
Drug court, yeah.
But they were reading Ben's book on 6 Years Lost, and they were talking about we need to do something different, even in the community of Red Wing and so on. And because of that, they started the treatment court, Goodhue County Treatment Court. And that night, Dennis was there and stood up and just kind of said, hey, I was part of this problem. I know what's happening. And now it's fascinating to watch him because he's one of the pivot points in the court system. And when the judge doesn't know what to do, they go to Dennis.
Imagine that.
And Dennis can tell you stories about the previous judges he ran into and things that were done, and you could buy off a judge at one point. You did, you know, and it's just how it all flips and how it all turns. And so that's part of the reason I wanted, you know, there are many reasons to have Dennis come up and give this talk, but he does this work too. I can call him at any time from a Regent's point, and he just shows right up.
Oh, yes.
And starts this process.
You guys, the opposite of addiction is connections. Because when you start to use, the first thing you start to do is disconnect. You disconnect from other people, friends that don't use, that aren't doing the same thing. You start to disconnect. And then you start disconnecting even from your own children, your wives, your family. You disconnect from everybody. Everybody and anybody that loves you. And that's part of what the enemy wants. He wants you alone because when you're alone, it's easier for him to convince you of his lies. So for a lot of people, Patty and I are their first good connection. And then from there, I always try to connect them with other people, try to connect them with the church. I'm always trying to connect them.
You can even take one of Dennis's books and give it to him.
How much time we got?
About 20 minutes, 25 minutes now.
Let me ask a question. Does anybody in here ever struggle with forgiving yourself? Bruce? Okay. I was working with this Hispanic guy. He did 20 years in a Brownsville, Texas prison, which is a really tough prison. He did 20 years. From the day he walked in until he walked out was 20 years. He was the shot caller for the MS-13s, one of the most violent Hispanic gangs in the United States. He was a shot caller. He had a Bible that he'd bring and show me, and it had blood splattered on it. He ordered people to die. He ordered people to be beat up, probably raped, everything. This is who, and I was working with him. His name was Jorge. And he come to me one day and he goes, Dennis, he goes, I understand that I have to forgive others. But he goes, I can't forgive myself for the things I do, and it's driving me crazy. He goes, how do I forgive myself? And I'm looking at him because I struggle with the same thing. How do you forgive yourself? I had no answers. And all of a sudden I looked at him, I said, then don't. And he looked at me, he goes, are you for real? And I pointed at his Bible. I said, Jorge, show me in this Bible where Jesus says to forgive yourself. I said, it's not in there. And he goes, are you for real, Otto? And I said, Jorge, I'm really hoping that was a Holy Spirit moment because I've never said that before to anybody. It's the first time I said it. Well, we get together the following week and he's all excited. He goes, Dennis, I Googled it. I was all over. He goes, Jesus doesn't tell us to forgive ourselves. I said, Jorge, that's what Jesus does. I said, you go to him, he forgives you. I said, you have to accept his forgiveness and you have to believe that it's forgiven. And he says, he says, he forgives our sins as far as the east is from the west. So far have I removed your transgressions. I said, when Jesus forgives you, I said, well, you got to forgive anyhow. And really, folks, every human being on this planet, every human being, has a debt that they can't pay to Christ. God can be around no sin. We cannot pay our debt. And we all have this debt. Jesus forgives that. That's the debt. He's the one that pays our debt. I just spoke up at Moose Lake Prison here a couple months ago. And when I got done, one of the guys from Prison Fellowship, and I talked to the guys about this forgiveness. And I did tell him, I said, guys, you have to learn to look in the mirror and like what you see. I said, the way I do that is by helping other people, using my poor choices of my past to help people today. That's how I can look in the mirror today, and I like what I see. But so I talked about that up at Moose Lake Prison, and the guy said, Dennis, you can't say that, what you did about forgiveness. And I looked at him, I said, I just did. Weren't you paying attention? You know, I just said it. And he goes, well, any therapist, any counselor would tell these men they need to learn to forgive themselves. And I said, my question to the therapist would be, have you forgiven yourself? Because your sins are no better than mine or any of these inmates. God doesn't categorize sin. Humans do. And I said, and when therapists say that, it's always to people struggling with addictions, people in prison. You need to forgive yourself. You know how many people I have talked to that have relapsed because they were carrying around this burden they couldn't forgive themselves. And everybody tells them they have to. And if they can't do it, they lose hope. I've had people, George, he does Real Recovery Radio on KTIS. He called me. He goes, Dennis, you don't have a clue what you did, do you? I said, no, I thought maybe I misquoted scripture or something. He goes, I've been struggling with forgiving myself for 30 years for some of the things I've done. And he goes, and I just realized I don't have to. Jesus forgave me. That's what it is, guys. If anybody, you're struggling with forgiving yourself, or if you're a therapist or counselor, I don't know. You do not have to forgive yourself. If it's not in the Bible, it doesn't matter. And the guy told the guy from Prison Fellowship, and he goes, well, I did a lot of research on the subject. I looked at him, I said, I didn't. I just read my Bible. And I walked away from him. I wrote about it in my book. That is the most commented thing. I get letters from all across the country from different jails, prisons. How my book got in there, I have no clue. But guys that have read my book and how they felt free, realizing they don't have to forgive themselves. That's what Jesus does. He forgives us. You ask him, he forgives us. I'm a pastor. I still sin every day. Every day. And I will until the day I die.